The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the cramped storage facility as Eloisa fumbled with the bolt cutters, her 7-month belly making every movement awkward. $50 was all she had left for baby supplies, and this mystery storage unit was her last shot at finding something valuable to sell. What she didn't expect was to find 17 suitcases, each tagged with a different name, each filled with personal belongings of people who had vanished without a trace. As a former investigative journalist, Eloisa recognized the pattern immediately. These weren't random lost luggage items. Someone had been collecting trophies. Her hands trembled as she opened wallet after wallet, finding driver's licenses of missing persons she'd once reported on, the cases that had ended her career when she got too close to the truth. Now, 8 months pregnant and alone, she faced an impossible choice: walk away and let these families never know what happened to their loved ones, or dive back into the investigation that had already cost her everything. But as footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, Eloisa realized the most terrifying truth of all. Someone knew she was here. Could the person behind these disappearances be closer than she ever imagined? The footsteps stopped directly outside Unit 247. Eloisa's breath caught in her throat as she crouched behind a tower of suitcases, her pregnant belly making the position nearly impossible to maintain. Through the metal slats of the roll-up door, she could see a shadow moving back and forth, as if someone was pacing. Her mind raced through the events that had led her here. 3 weeks ago, she'd seen the storage unit auction notice posted on a community bulletin board at the grocery store. Storage Universe, Lot 247, contents unknown, minimum bid $50. She'd scraped together the money from returning bottles and selling her last piece of jewelry, her grandmother's pearl earrings. The auction had been sparsely attended. Just her, an elderly man who collected vintage furniture, and a woman in dark sunglasses who never raised her paddle. Eloisa had won with the minimum bid, thinking she might find electronics or clothing she could resell online. The monthly storage rent hadn't been paid in 6 months, according to the auctioneer. The previous renter had simply vanished. Now, surrounded by evidence of unspeakable crimes, that detail took on a sinister new meaning. The shadow outside shifted, and Eloisa heard the distinct sound of keys jingling. Her blood turned to ice. Whoever was out there had access to the facility. She looked around desperately for another exit, but storage units only had one way in and out. Quietly, she reached for the nearest suitcase and unzipped it with shaking fingers. Inside, beneath neatly folded clothes, she found a leather portfolio. She recognized the name on the luggage tag immediately: Marcus Chen, a software developer who had disappeared 2 years ago while hiking alone in the mountains. The case had gone cold after weeks of searching, turned up nothing. But Marcus Chen had never been hiking. The portfolio contained boarding passes to Miami, hotel reservations for a business conference, and a schedule of meetings with potential investors. Everything suggested he'd been planning a normal business trip, not a solo mountain adventure. The jingling of keys grew louder, accompanied by the heavy metallic sound of other unit doors being tested. Someone was checking each unit systematically, working their way down the corridor. Eloisa estimated she had maybe 2 minutes before they reached 247. She grabbed her phone and began photographing everything she could: the luggage tags, the driver's licenses, the contents of Marcus Chen's portfolio. The camera flash seemed blindingly bright in the dim storage unit, and she prayed it wasn't visible from outside. Another suitcase revealed more disturbing evidence. Sarah Martinez, missing for 3 years, supposedly last seen leaving her apartment for a morning jog. But her suitcase contained vacation clothes, cruise tickets, and a passport. Her family had been told she'd simply gone for a run and never came back. The pattern was becoming clear. These people hadn't vanished during their normal daily activities, as the police reports claimed. They had been traveling, which would explain why their disappearances hadn't been immediately noticed and why the investigations had stalled. The footsteps stopped. Eloisa held her breath as she heard the metallic scrape of a key being inserted into a lock somewhere close by. Too close. She quickly scrolled through her phone's contacts, hovering over Detective Ray Morrison's number. He'd been her contact at the police department during her reporting days, one of the few cops who'd believed her theories about connected cases. But calling him would mean admitting she was here, admitting she'd found evidence in what was essentially a crime scene she'd purchased at auction. The sound of a rolling door opening echoed through the corridor, followed by footsteps inside one of the neighboring units. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, not the casual gait of someone checking their own belongings. Eloisa made her decision. She hit Morrison's number and prayed he still used the same phone, while simultaneously planning her escape route through the maze of suitcases toward the unit's entrance. The phone rang once before a familiar gravelly voice answered. "Morrison, Ray, it's Eloisa. I need help, and I think I found something big." The pregnancy test had shown 2 pink lines 3 months ago, and Jake had walked out 2 weeks later. "I'm not ready for this," he'd said, stuffing clothes into a duffel bag, while Eloisa sat on their second-hand couch, still processing the news herself. The slam of the apartment door had echoed through the thin walls, and she hadn't heard from him since. Now, standing in the scorching Phoenix heat outside Sunset Storage, Eloisa wiped sweat from her forehead and stared at the rusty padlock she'd just cut through. Unit 247. She'd bid on it blind at the auction yesterday, hoping for furniture or electronics she could flip online. The auctioneer had rattled off the usual warnings, contents unknown, all sales final, but for $63 it seemed worth the gamble. Her bank account couldn't afford much more anyway. The metal door screeched as she rolled it up, revealing a space about the size of a walk-in closet. No furniture, no obvious treasures, just 3 battered suitcases arranged against the back wall like soldiers at attention. Her heart sank. Vintage luggage might sell for something on eBay, but probably not enough to cover even the auction fee. She grabbed the nearest suitcase, a brown leather case with brass corners worn smooth by age. The latches opened with soft clicks that seemed too loud in the empty corridor. Inside, manila folders filled every inch of space, organized with an almost military precision. She lifted the top folder and opened it. A photograph of a young woman stared back at her, blonde hair, bright smile, wearing a red sundress. Below the photo, someone had typed, "Jennifer Martinez, 23, disappeared July 15, 2019, last seen leaving work at Benny's Diner." Underneath that, handwritten notes filled the page in cramped, urgent script. "Boyfriend has alibi. Checked. Co-workers say she seemed nervous last week. Security footage shows her getting into unknown vehicle." Eloisa's hands trembled as she flipped to the next page. More photos of Jennifer, candid shots that looked like they'd been taken without the subject's knowledge. Jennifer walking to her car. Jennifer through a restaurant window. Jennifer talking to a man whose face had been circled in red ink. She set the folder aside and grabbed another. "Maria Santos, 31, disappeared September 3, 2020. Same format, professional photos, personal details, surveillance shots. The handwriting was identical, methodical notes tracking the woman's last known movements." Her throat went dry. She opened the second suitcase with shaking fingers. More folders, more missing women. Each file contained dozens of photographs, detailed timelines, maps with routes marked in colored pen. Someone had spent considerable time and effort documenting these cases. But why keep them in a storage unit? And why did the notes read like an investigation rather than police reports? The third suitcase made her stomach lurch. These folders were different. Crime scene photos, newspaper clippings, with headlines like, "Local woman found dead," and "Murder investigation continues." The same methodical handwriting filled the margins, but now the notes had a different tone. Police focused on wrong suspect, evidence overlooked, timeline doesn't match. Eloisa counted 17 different cases spanning the last 5 years, all women between 20 and 35, all from the Phoenix metro area. Some were listed as missing persons, others as unsolved murders. The files contained information she was certain the police wouldn't share with civilians: autopsy details, witness statements, evidence logs. She sat back on her heels, her 14-week pregnant belly making it awkward to crouch in the small space. This wasn't someone's hobby or true crime obsession. This was something else entirely. The level of detail, the access to confidential information, the surveillance photos that would have required stalking these women. It painted a picture that made her skin crawl. A car door slammed somewhere in the parking lot, and she jumped. The sound echoed off the metal buildings, reminding her how isolated she was in this maze of storage units. She glanced at her watch, 3:47 p.m. The facility would close at 6, and she was probably the only person here besides the bored teenager manning the front office. She needed to call the police. These files represented either evidence of multiple crimes or the obsessive documentation of someone dangerous. Either way, they didn't belong in her hands. But as she reached for her phone, she noticed something that stopped her cold. The last folder in the third suitcase bore a tab labeled "In Progress." Inside was a single photograph, paper-clipped to a blank information sheet. The photo showed a woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a blue maternity top, standing in front of the storage facility office. The woman was her. The timestamp in the corner showed yesterday's date. Someone had photographed her at the auction, and somehow that photo had ended up in a file with 17 dead and missing women. Eloisa's hands shook as she dropped the folder. In the sudden silence of the storage unit, she heard something that made her blood freeze. Footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate, growing closer. The first suitcase sat open on her kitchen table like a wound exposing its secrets. Eloisa had barely slept, her mind churning through possibilities that grew more disturbing with each passing hour. Marcus had left for his early shift at the warehouse, kissing her forehead and whispering promises about cribs and college funds, oblivious to the nightmare she'd stumbled into. She pulled the manila folders closer, her hands trembling as she opened the first file. Sarah Chen, aged 24, disappeared from a grocery store parking lot in Phoenix 3 years ago. The folder contained photographs: Sarah laughing with friends, Sarah at her college graduation, Sarah's abandoned car with its driver's side door hanging open. Police reports detailed the investigation's dead ends, witness statements that led nowhere, and a family's desperate pleas for information. The next folder made her stomach lurch. David Moreno, 31, vanished while jogging in a Denver park. His running shoes had been found by the lake, laces still tied. The file included maps marked with red X's, crime scene photos, and a timeline of his last known movements. Someone had highlighted certain passages in yellow, adding handwritten notes in the margins. The handwriting was neat, methodical, almost clinical. Eloisa pushed back from the table, pressing her palms against her rounded belly. The baby kicked, a reassuring flutter that reminded her she wasn't just responsible for herself anymore. She should call the police. That was the rational thing to do. Turn over the evidence and let the authorities handle it. But something held her back. The way these files were organized suggested they weren't just random case documents someone had stolen. They were curated, studied, analyzed. The highlighted sections all focused on the victims' routines, their predictable patterns, their moments of vulnerability. This wasn't the work of a concerned citizen or even an obsessed true crime enthusiast. This felt like a predator's research. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Enjoying your purchase?" The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the linoleum floor. She stared at the message, her heart hammering against her ribs. She hadn't told anyone about the storage unit contents except Marcus, and even then she'd only mentioned finding some documents. Her fingers shook as she typed back. "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who knows you found something that doesn't belong to you." Eloisa's eyes darted to the windows. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, overlooking a busy street, but suddenly every passing car seemed suspicious, every pedestrian a potential threat. She moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the sidewalk below. Nothing looked out of place, yet the weight of unseen eyes pressed against her consciousness. Another text arrived. "Check the second suitcase, bottom compartment." Her breath caught. Whoever was messaging her knew exactly what was in that storage unit. They knew she'd opened the first suitcase but not the second, which meant they were either watching her right now or had been tracking her progress somehow. Despite every instinct screaming at her to run, curiosity and a strange sense of defiance drew her to the second suitcase. She unzipped the bottom compartment with careful fingers, revealing a collection of newspaper clippings and printed articles. But these weren't about missing persons. These were about women who'd been found. Bodies discovered in remote locations, months or years after disappearance, victims who matched the profiles in the other folders, young, alone, following predictable routines. The articles painted a picture of a methodical killer who moved between states, never staying in one place long enough to establish a clear pattern. At the bottom of the pile, she found a local newspaper from just 2 weeks ago. The headline made her blood freeze. Local woman reports strange storage unit purchase, police investigating. But that was impossible. She hadn't reported anything to police. She'd barely told Marcus the full truth. She read the brief article with growing horror. It described a pregnant woman who'd bought a storage unit and found disturbing evidence inside. The woman's name wasn't mentioned, but specific details about the unit's location and contents left no doubt about the story's subject. The article quoted an anonymous police source saying they were following up on the tip but had no active investigation. The final paragraph chilled her to the bone. Local authorities remind residents that storage unit auctions can sometimes yield unexpected discoveries. Anyone with information about unusual findings should contact police immediately for their own safety. Her phone buzzed again. Now you understand. You're already part of the story. The only question is how it ends. Eloisa sank into a chair, her mind racing. Someone had planted a false news story about her discovery, creating a public record of her involvement before she'd even decided what to do. They were controlling the narrative, backing her into a corner where any move she made would seem predetermined. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing her distress. She placed both hands protectively over her belly, a fierce maternal instinct overriding her fear. Whatever game this person was playing, whatever trap they were setting, she wouldn't let them hurt her child. The lock clicked open with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for her touch. Eloisa's hands trembled as she lifted the hasp, the metallic sound echoing in the narrow corridor lined with identical orange doors. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows that made her feel like she was being watched from every corner. She rolled up the door slowly, wincing at the screech of metal against metal. The smell hit her first, a musty combination of old leather, dust, and something else she couldn't quite identify, something that made her stomach lurch in a way that had nothing to do with morning sickness. The unit was smaller than she'd hoped, maybe 8 by 10 feet, but it was packed from floor to ceiling. Her heart sank a little as she took in the contents. No obvious antiques or valuable furniture that she could easily flip for baby money. Instead, the space was dominated by a collection of suitcases and boxes, all arranged with an almost military precision that struck her as odd. Eloisa pulled out her phone's flashlight and stepped inside, her sneakers crunching on something that might have been old newspapers. The nearest suitcase was a faded blue Samsonite, the kind her grandmother used to take on vacation. She hefted it onto a clear spot on the floor, heavier than expected, and worked at the brass latches until they popped open with twin snaps. The contents made her breath catch in her throat. Photographs, dozens of them, all 8 by 10 glosses in black and white. But these weren't family vacation pictures or wedding portraits. Each image showed a different person, men, women, teenagers, captured in what appeared to be candid moments, walking to their cars, entering buildings, sitting in restaurants. The photos had a surveillance quality that made her skin crawl, as if she was looking at someone's hunting trophies. Beneath the photographs was a manila folder thick with papers. Eloisa opened it with shaking fingers and found what looked like personal information, addresses, work schedules, family details, daily routines, all meticulously handwritten in the same cramped script. At the top of each page was a name she didn't recognize, followed by the word missing stamped in red ink. Her hands flew to her mouth as the implications hit her. She scrambled backward, nearly tripping over another suitcase, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't someone's forgotten belongings. This was evidence. Evidence of something terrible. The baby kicked hard as if sensing her distress, and Eloisa had to grab the doorframe to steady herself. She should leave. Right now. Walk away and pretend she'd never seen any of this. But her eyes were drawn to the other suitcases, and despite every instinct screaming at her to run, she found herself reaching for the next one. This case contained clothing, men's and women's items that looked like they'd been carefully folded and preserved. Each piece was tagged with a small white label bearing a date and initials. The dates went back years, some more than a decade old. She recognized some of the brands, expensive pieces that suggested the owners had money. Had being the operative phrase. A noise from somewhere in the facility made her freeze. Footsteps echoing off the concrete floors. Slow, deliberate steps that seemed to be moving in her direction. Eloisa quickly closed the suitcase and crept to the entrance of the unit, peering down the corridor. The sound had stopped, but the silence felt ominous rather than reassuring. She pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the keypad. Call the police. That was the rational thing to do. But what would she tell them? That she'd bought a storage unit at auction and found some suspicious items? Would they even take her seriously? And what if whoever had rented this unit originally was still around, still watching? The thought sent ice through her veins. The storage facility required minimal identification to rent a unit, and auctions were public events. Anyone could have seen her bidding, could have followed her here. She thought about the strange feeling she'd had lately of being observed, the sense that someone was always just out of sight. Another sound, closer this time. Definitely footsteps. Eloisa made a split-second decision, grabbing the manila folder from the first suitcase and shoving it into her purse. Evidence. If something happened to her, if she disappeared like the people in those photographs, maybe someone would find it and understand. She pulled the door down as quietly as possible and snapped the lock back into place, her fingers fumbling with the mechanism. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied now by the squeak of wheels. Probably another treasure hunter with a dolly, she told herself, but her body wasn't buying the rational explanation. Eloisa walked quickly toward the exit, forcing herself not to run, not to look back. But she could feel eyes on her, watching her retreat. As she pushed through the glass doors into the parking lot, she caught a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision. A figure standing in the shadows near the office building, too far away to make out clearly but close enough to know they were staring directly at her. The pregnancy hormones made everything feel amplified. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she stared at the suitcases, her palms slick with sweat despite the storage unit's chill. Eloisa forced herself to breathe slowly, counting to 5 with each inhale. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs that somehow grounded her back to reality. She couldn't leave this here. Whatever these cases represented, whatever had happened to these people, their families deserved answers. But calling the police felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. What if they thought she was involved somehow? What if this delayed getting any money for the baby's arrival? The practical part of her mind, the part that had learned to calculate grocery bills down to the penny, whispered that she should just walk away. Close the unit, pretend she'd never seen inside those suitcases, sell whatever else she could find and forget this nightmare. But as she started to zip the first suitcase closed, her fingers brushed against something that made her stomach lurch. A hospital bracelet, the kind they put on newborns. Pink plastic with faded lettering, Baby Girl Martinez, August 15th, 2019. The bracelet trembled in her hand as the implications crashed over her. This wasn't just about missing adults. Children were involved, maybe even infants. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How's the treasure hunting going? Find anything good?" She stared at the message, then at the evidence scattered around her feet. How could she possibly explain this? Marcus would insist she call the police immediately, but he didn't understand the delicate balance of their finances. how desperately they needed every dollar. His overtime at the warehouse barely covered their current expenses, let alone the mounting costs of preparing for their daughter's arrival. Another kick from the baby, stronger this time, almost like a reminder. Eloisa made her decision. She would document everything first, then call the authorities. At least that way she'd have her own record of what she'd found, some protection against any accusations. She pulled out her phone and began taking pictures, her hands surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. The camera flash illuminated details she'd missed in the dim overhead light. In one suitcase, beneath a stack of missing person flyers, she found a manila envelope thick with cash. Her breath caught. There had to be several $1,000s, maybe more, enough to cover the hospital bills, the crib they'd been putting off buying, the car seat that kept getting pushed to next month's budget. She lifted the envelope, feeling its weight. No one would know if she took just enough to cover their immediate needs. The money was evidence, yes, but it wouldn't help find these missing people. It would just sit in some police storage room for years while the cases went cold. The internal debate raged as she continued photographing. In the second suitcase, she found more cash, along with jewelry and what looked like small personal items, wedding rings, watches, a child's silver locket with a tiny photo inside. Her hands shook as she documented each piece. A sound from outside the unit made her freeze. Footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. The storage facility should be closed at this hour, and she'd seen no other cars in the lot when she'd arrived. She held her breath, listening. The footsteps stopped directly outside her unit. Eloisa's mind raced through possibilities. A security guard making rounds, another storage unit renter working late, but something about the deliberate pace, the way the footsteps had seemed to approach her specific unit, sent ice through her veins. She quietly set down her phone and moved toward the partially raised door, keeping to the shadows. Through the gap at the bottom, she could see a pair of work boots, scuffed and stained, positioned as if someone was standing guard. The silence stretched, pregnant with menace. Whoever was out there wasn't moving, wasn't announcing themselves, wasn't doing anything a legitimate security guard or facility employee would do. They were waiting. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Someone knew she was here. Someone knew what she'd found. The same someone who had filled these suitcases with evidence of disappearances, who had paid for this storage unit month after month to keep their secrets hidden. Her phone, still open to the camera, sat in a pool of light near the suitcases. The photos she'd taken were automatically backing up to the cloud, she realized, with a mixture of relief and terror. Even if something happened to her, even if her phone was destroyed, the evidence would exist somewhere. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing her fear. Eloisa pressed her hand to her belly, a fierce protectiveness overwhelming every other emotion. Whatever was happening here, whoever was standing outside that door, she had to think of her daughter first. She needed to get out of here, now. But the only exit was past those boots, past whoever was waiting in the darkness beyond her small circle of light. The manila folder trembled in Eloisa's hands as she spread its contents across her kitchen table. Detective Martinez sat across from her, his weathered face growing graver with each photograph and document she revealed. The missing persons files weren't random. They formed a horrifying pattern that made her stomach clench with something beyond morning sickness. All women, Martinez murmured, studying the photos. All between 25 and 35, all pregnant when they disappeared. Eloisa's hand instinctively moved to her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. How is that possible? These cases span 3 different states. Martinez picked up Sarah Chen's file, the one that had haunted Eloisa since yesterday. Cross-jurisdictional cases often fall through the cracks. Different departments, different databases. Someone would have to be looking for this specific pattern to see it. Someone like the person who collected these files, Eloisa whispered. The detective's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at Eloisa. The storage facility manager is here. I asked him to come in for questioning. Through the kitchen window, Eloisa watched a patrol car pull up. A thin man in his 50s emerged, flanked by 2 officers. Even from a distance, she could see the nervous way he kept adjusting his glasses. "Mrs. Rivera, I need you to stay inside while I speak with him," Martinez said, gathering some of the files. "Lock the door behind me." Eloisa nodded, but as soon as the detective stepped outside, she found herself creeping closer to the window. The manager, she remembered the nameplate on his desk read, Dale Hutchins, looked increasingly agitated as Martinez questioned him. His hands gestured wildly, and she caught fragments of his high-pitched voice through the glass. "Don't know anything about what's in the units. People abandon them all the time. Just doing my job." Martinez held up one of the photographs. Even from her hiding spot, Eloisa could see Hutchins go rigid. His face drained of color, and he took a step backward. Then he was pointing directly at her house. Ice flooded her veins. She dropped below the windowsill, her heart hammering against her ribs. Why was he pointing at her? How could he even know she lived here? The sound of car doors slamming made her risk another glance. The patrol car was driving away, but Hutchins wasn't in it. Instead, Martinez was walking back toward her front door, his expression troubled. "What happened?" she asked, before he'd fully stepped inside. "He lawyered up the moment I showed him Sarah Chen's photo, but not before he said something interesting." Martinez locked the door behind him. "He claims someone's been paying him to monitor unit sales. Cash payments always left in an envelope in his desk drawer." "Monitor how?" "Names and addresses of buyers. He's supposed to report back within 24 hours of any sale." Martinez's jaw tightened. "He reported your purchase Tuesday morning." The room seemed to tilt. Eloisa gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "That means they've known about me for 3 days. It means we need to move you somewhere safe. Tonight. I can't just leave. My job, my life." "Mrs. Rivera." Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. "Whoever orchestrated this has been planning it for years. They've been collecting evidence of their crimes like trophies. And now they know you have it." Eloisa sank into the chair, overwhelmed. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and she wondered what kind of world she was bringing her child into. What about Tom? He should be back from his conference tomorrow. "We'll contact him. But right now, you're the priority." A soft thud from upstairs made them both freeze. Martinez's hand moved to his weapon. "Did you leave any windows open?" "No," Eloisa breathed. "I checked them all this morning." Another sound, like something being dragged across the floor. Martinez motioned for her to stay put and started toward the stairs. Eloisa's phone, sitting on the table beside the files, lit up with a text message. The number was unknown, but the message made her blood turn to ice. "You have something that belongs to me. 3rd drawer, bedroom dresser. Come alone or the detective dies." Her hands shaking, she looked up to see Martinez halfway up the staircase. She wanted to scream, to warn him, but the message was clear. Any sound from her could be his death sentence. Instead, she forced herself to move quietly toward the stairs. Each step felt like walking through quicksand. The baby's movements inside her had stilled, as if even her unborn child sensed the danger. At the top of the stairs, she could see Martinez standing outside her bedroom door, listening. The door was ajar. She was certain she'd closed it that morning. Her dresser was visible through the gap. The 3rd drawer hung open like a mouth, waiting to reveal whatever secret had been planted there. Martinez caught her eye and held up 3 fingers, counting down. 3, 2, 1. The fluorescent lights in the police station lobby buzzed overhead like trapped insects as Eloisa shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair. Her hand rested protectively over her belly, fingers drumming an anxious rhythm against the fabric of her coat. Detective Martinez had disappeared behind a set of double doors 20 minutes ago with the manila envelope containing copies of the photographs she'd found. "Mrs. Chen," a different voice called her name. She looked up to see a tall, thin man in his 50s approaching, his grey suit wrinkled and coffee-stained. "I'm Detective Rodriguez Martinez. Filled me in on your situation." The way he said situation made her stomach clench, like he didn't quite believe her story. "Can we talk somewhere private?" she asked, glancing around at the other people waiting in the lobby. A man with a black eye sat 3 chairs away, close enough to overhear. Rodriguez nodded and led her down a hallway lined with motivational posters and departmental notices. The interview room he chose was small and windowless, with a metal table bolted to the floor and chairs that had seen better decades. The smell of industrial disinfectant couldn't quite mask the underlying odors of fear and desperation that seemed baked into the walls. "Tell me about the storage unit," Rodriguez said, settling into his chair with a grunt. He pulled out a digital recorder and placed it on the table between them. From the beginning. Eloisa took a shaky breath and started with the auction, describing the impulse purchase and her hopes of finding items to resell. Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow pad. When she reached the part about discovering the first photograph, his pen stopped moving. "You said these photos showed missing persons." "I think so. They look like surveillance photos. People going about their daily lives, but the subjects were circled in red ink, and there were newspaper clippings with some of them. Missing person reports." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Do you remember any names?" "Sarah Chen. No relation despite the last name. She disappeared 3 years ago from Riverside. There was a college student named Marcus Webb, and," she paused, remembering the most disturbing image, "a little girl, maybe 8 years old." The photo showed her walking to school. The detective's expression darkened. "Did you bring all the evidence with you?" "Just copies of some photos. The rest is hidden." She wasn't about to reveal the location, not yet. Something about Rodriguez's demeanor felt off, though she couldn't pinpoint what. "Mrs. Chen, I need to stress how important it is that you turn over everything. If these items are connected to active missing persons cases, withholding evidence could be considered obstruction of justice." The threat was delivered in a calm, professional tone, but it hit her like ice water. "I'm not trying to obstruct anything. I'm here because I want to help." "Of course. But you mentioned feeling watched. Can you elaborate on that?" She described the black sedan, the phone calls, the sensation of being observed. Rodriguez took notes, but his body language suggested skepticism. When she finished, he set down his pen and studied her face. "Mrs. Chen, pregnancy can cause heightened anxiety, paranoia even. Are you sure these incidents weren't coincidental?" Heat flashed through her chest. "I'm not imagining this." "I'm not saying you are, but we need to consider all possibilities." He glanced at his notes. "You said the storage unit was purchased under the name Robert Kellerman?" "That's what the auction list showed." "We'll run that name, see what comes up. In the meantime, I strongly advise you to bring us everything you found. We can provide protection if there's a genuine threat." Protection. The word should have been comforting, but something in Rodriguez's tone made it sound more like custody. She thought about David's skepticism, about the way this detective seemed more interested in getting the evidence than investigating her claims. "What happens next?" she asked. "We investigate. But, Mrs. Chen, I need to be clear, if you're in possession of evidence related to serious crimes and you don't cooperate fully, there could be consequences. Legal consequences." The baby kicked, as if responding to her elevated heart rate. She placed both hands over her belly, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on the detective. "I understand," she said quietly. Rodriguez handed her a business card. "Call me when you're ready to bring in the rest of the evidence. Don't wait too long." She left the station feeling more unsettled than when she'd arrived. The afternoon sun seemed too bright after the fluorescent-lit interview room, and she fumbled for her sunglasses. As she walked to her car, the sensation of being watched crawled up her spine again. In the driver's seat, she locked the doors and started the engine. Only then did she notice the piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper, fluttering in the breeze like a trapped moth. Her hands shook as she retrieved it. The message was printed in block letters. "Some secrets are worth dying for." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Eloisa sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by the contents of the third suitcase. Her hands trembled as she held a stack of photographs, each one showing a different person in what appeared to be their final moments. The images were clinical, methodical, like documentation rather than trophies. Marcus paced behind her, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in hushed tones to Detective Hayes. Through the thin apartment walls, she could hear Mrs. Chen's television playing a game show, the audience's laughter creating a surreal soundtrack to the horror spread before them. "The detective wants us to stop touching anything," Marcus said, ending the call. "She's sending a team over." Eloisa nodded but didn't look up from a manila envelope she'd just discovered. Inside were newspaper clippings, each headline screaming about another disappearance. Sarah Valdez, 23, vanished from a grocery store parking lot. Miguel Santos, 31, never returned home from his night shift. Jennifer Walsh, 19, last seen leaving her college library. "These dates," she whispered, arranging the clippings chronologically, "they go back 7 years." Marcus crouched beside her, careful not to disturb the evidence. "What are you thinking?" "Look at the pattern. Every few months, like clockwork." She pointed to the dates she'd circled in her mind. "And they're all from different cities, but within driving distance of each other." A knock at the door made them both freeze. Eloisa's heart hammered against her ribs as she remembered the figure in her peripheral vision at the grocery store, the feeling of being watched. Marcus moved toward the window, peering through the blinds. "Police," he said, relief evident in his voice. Detective Hayes entered with 2 crime scene technicians, their equipment cases clicking against the doorframe. She surveyed the organized chaos of evidence, her expression grim. "Miss Rivera, I need you to walk me through exactly how you found each item and where." For the next hour, Eloisa recounted every detail while the technicians photographed and bagged evidence. She explained about the false bottom in the first suitcase, the hidden compartment in the second, and how the third had been sealed with industrial tape. "The storage unit," Detective Hayes said, making notes. "Tell me about the auction again. Who else was there? Who was bidding against you?" Eloisa closed her eyes, trying to recall faces from that day. "There was an older man in a baseball cap who bid on a few units, a woman with short blonde hair, and—" She paused, a chill running down her spine. "There was someone in the back who never bid on anything. I remember because he seemed more interested in watching the people than the units." "Can you describe him?" "Average height, dark jacket. He had a beard, I think, but he kept to the shadows." Detective Hayes exchanged a look with one of the technicians. "We're going to need you to work with a sketch artist." "Detective," Marcus interrupted, "what about Eloisa's safety? If whoever stored these things realizes what she found—" "We're arranging protection," Hayes said. "But there's something else. The storage facility's security cameras were vandalized 3 days ago. All the footage from the past month is gone." The words hit Eloisa like a physical blow. 3 days ago was when she'd first noticed the feeling of being watched. "They know," she whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "They know I have their things." "We don't know that for certain," Detective Hayes said, but her tone lacked conviction. One of the technicians called out from the corner where he'd been examining the suitcases themselves. "Detective, you need to see this." They gathered around as he pointed to a small marking on the inside lining of the largest suitcase. Etched into the fabric with what looked like a knife tip was a symbol, a circle with 3 intersecting lines. "I've seen this before," Hayes said quietly, "in a case file from another jurisdiction." Eloisa felt the room spin slightly. The weight of everything, the pregnancy, the financial stress, and now this nightmare she'd stumbled into, pressed down on her shoulders. What does it mean? It might be a signature. Serial killers sometimes mark their work. The baby kicked, a strong jab that made Eloisa gasp. She realized with growing horror that she'd brought this evil into her home, into the space where she'd planned to bring her child. The nursery was just down the hallway, painted yellow with teddy bear decals she'd applied so carefully. "I need some air," she managed, standing too quickly and swaying. Marcus steadied her as Detective Hayes stepped closer. "Ms. Rivera, I know this is overwhelming, but you may have just broken open the biggest serial case this region has seen. These people, their families deserve answers." Through the window, Eloisa could see the street where she'd lived peacefully for 2 years. Now every shadow seemed threatening, every passing car suspicious. Someone out there knew her name, knew where she lived, and knew she had discovered their carefully hidden secrets. The hunter had become the hunted, and she was carrying the most precious target of all. The weight of the pregnancy made every step feel deliberate as Eloisa climbed the stairs to her apartment, Marcus's hand steady on her lower back. The manila envelope felt like it was burning through her purse, the photographs inside seeming to pulse with malevolent energy. She'd managed to keep her composure in the coffee shop, but now her hands were trembling so violently she could barely get her keys in the lock. "Let me," Marcus said softly, taking the keys and opening the door. He checked the apartment quickly before allowing her inside, a habit that had developed over the past week. The normalcy of her living room, the throw pillows she'd arranged that morning, the pregnancy books stacked on the coffee table, felt surreal after what they'd just discovered. Eloisa sank onto the couch and pulled out the envelope with shaking hands. The photographs scattered across the coffee table like accusations. There she was, entering the storage facility that first day, her face bright with hope and determination. Another shot of her loading boxes into her car, one taken through her apartment window as she'd examined the suitcases, the telephoto lens making her feel naked and exposed. "These were taken over the course of several days," Marcus observed, his voice clinical as he studied the angles and lighting. "Professional quality. Whoever this is has been planning this surveillance carefully." The baby kicked sharply as if sensing her distress, and Eloisa placed both hands on her belly. "The storage unit was a trap," she whispered. "Whoever put those suitcases there wanted them to be found, but not by authorities. They wanted someone like me, desperate, unlikely to go to police right away." Marcus picked up one of the photographs, his jaw tightening. "This one was taken yesterday when you went to the grocery store." He held it up, a shot of Eloisa loading groceries into her car, completely unaware she was being watched. "They know your routine, your habits." The realization hit her like cold water. The man at the coffee shop, when he brushed past our table, he could have left that envelope then. Her voice rose in panic. "He was right there, Marcus. Right there, and we didn't even know." "Hey." Marcus moved to sit beside her, his voice gentle but urgent. "Look at me. We're going to figure this out, but I need you to stay calm. Stress isn't good for you or the baby." Eloisa forced herself to take deep breaths, but her mind was racing. Why watch me? Why not just take the suitcases back? Unless... She looked up at Marcus, a terrible thought forming. Unless they can't risk being connected to that storage unit themselves. What if whoever rented it is dead, or missing, like the people in those files? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this. That would explain why they need you to return everything. They can't approach the storage facility themselves without creating a paper trail or being caught on security cameras. "But I've already been to the police," Eloisa said, though even as she spoke, she realized how little she'd actually told Detective Morrison. She'd been vague about the contents, scared and overwhelmed. What if they don't know that? The sound of her phone buzzing made them both jump. A text from an unknown number. "Check your balcony." Eloisa felt her blood turn to ice. Marcus was already moving, pulling her behind him as he approached the sliding glass door. Her second-floor balcony faced the courtyard, usually empty except for the occasional resident walking their dog. Now there was a small box sitting on her patio table. "Don't go out there," Marcus said firmly. "I'm calling Detective Morrison." "Wait." Eloisa grabbed his arm. "What if this is our chance to end this? What if they left something that could lead us to them? Or what if it's a bomb?" Marcus's voice was sharp with fear. You can't take risks like this anymore. You're not just thinking for yourself." She knew he was right, but the waiting was killing her. Every moment they delayed felt like another moment for this person to disappear, to hurt someone else. Just look at it through the glass. Don't touch anything." Reluctantly, Marcus approached the window. The box was small, brown cardboard, with no markings visible. "I can't tell what it is from here." Eloisa's phone buzzed again. "Open it if you want this to end. You have 1 hour. They're watching us right now," she breathed, instinctively stepping back from the window. "They can see us in here." Marcus immediately moved to close the curtains, his movements sharp and protective. "That's it. I'm calling Morrison, and we're getting you somewhere safe." "No," Eloisa said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Running away won't protect the baby. This person will just keep following, keep escalating. We need to end this now." She looked at the closed curtains, knowing that somewhere out there someone was watching and waiting. "But we're going to do it smart, and we're not going to do it alone." The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Eloisa took it as agreement. Whatever was in that box, whatever this person wanted from her, she was going to face it head-on. The drive to the police station felt like the longest 20 minutes of Eloisa's life. Every shadow seemed to harbor a threat, every car behind them a potential tail. Marcus kept checking his mirrors, his knuckles white against the steering wheel as they navigated through the late afternoon traffic. There, Eloisa pointed to the modest brick building ahead. "That's Detective Chen's station." Marcus pulled into the visitor parking, scanning the area before killing the engine. The manila envelope sat heavy in Eloisa's lap, copies of the most damning evidence from the storage unit. The originals remained hidden in Marcus's apartment, a decision they'd agonized over but ultimately agreed upon. If something happened to these copies, they'd still have backup. Detective Sarah Chen was younger than Eloisa had expected, maybe mid-30s with sharp eyes and an air of quiet competence. She listened without interruption as Eloisa laid out everything: the storage unit purchase, the discovery of the suitcases, the break-in at her apartment, the feeling of being watched. "These photographs," Chen said, spreading them across her desk. "Some of these faces look familiar, missing persons cases that went cold." She paused at one particular photo, a young woman with distinctive red hair. "Jessica Martinez, disappeared 3 years ago from downtown. Her case file is thicker than a phone book, but we never found a single solid lead." Eloisa felt the baby kick, as if responding to the gravity of the moment. "So these are real? These people are actually missing?" "I'll need to cross-reference everything, but yes. What you've brought me here, this could break open cases that have haunted this department for years." Chen's expression darkened. "Which also means you're in serious danger. Whoever compiled this evidence, whoever had that storage unit, they're not going to be happy about losing it." "We figured that part out when someone broke into my apartment," Eloisa said dryly. Chen leaned forward. "Tell me about the storage facility. Who did you buy the unit from?" "Online auction. The website said it belonged to someone named Robert Hayes, but when I tried to research him, I couldn't find much information, like he barely existed." "Robert Hayes." Chen wrote the name down. "We'll look into that. What about the facility itself? Did anyone there seem suspicious?" Marcus spoke up. "The manager, Carl, seemed normal enough, maybe a little too eager to process the sale quickly, but nothing that screamed red flags at the time." Chen's phone rang, and she glanced at the caller ID. "Excuse me, I need to take this." She stepped into the hallway, leaving Eloisa and Marcus alone with the evidence spread across the desk. "Look at this," Marcus whispered, pointing to one of the documents Eloisa hadn't noticed before. It was a handwritten list of dates and locations, some crossed out in red ink. "These dates, they go back 5 years, but look at the bottom ones. They're recent, like within the last month recent." Eloisa felt ice form in her stomach. "You think whoever this is, they're still active?" Before Marcus could answer, Chen returned, her expression grim. "That was my partner. We just got a call about Robert Hayes. Turns out he's been dead for 6 months, natural causes, heart attack. Whoever used his identity to rent that storage unit picked a ghost." "So we're dealing with someone who plans ahead," Eloisa said. "More than that. Someone with access to personal information, someone who knows how to stay invisible." Chen gathered the photos into a neat stack. I'm going to start making calls, get some of these cases reopened. In the meantime, you two need to be extremely careful. Don't go back to your apartment, Eloisa. Don't follow any regular routines. She's been staying at my place, Marcus said. But after today, find somewhere else. A hotel maybe, but pay cash and use false names. I know it sounds paranoid, but whoever we're dealing with found you once. They can find you again. As they prepared to leave, Chen handed Eloisa her business card. My personal cell is on the back. Call me if anything, and I mean anything, seems off. A strange car, someone following you, a gut feeling that something's wrong. Don't hesitate. Walking back to the car, Eloisa felt exposed under the late afternoon sun. The parking lot that had seemed normal an hour ago now felt like a maze of potential hiding spots. Every person walking nearby could be watching them. Hotel it is, Marcus said, starting the engine. I know a place on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, but they take cash and don't ask questions. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Eloisa noticed a silver sedan 3 cars back that had been there when they'd arrived. It could be coincidence. It probably was coincidence. But as Marcus turned left at the next intersection, the silver sedan turned left too. Marcus, she said quietly, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. I think we have company. The abandoned warehouse squatted against the grey morning sky like a malignant tumor. Eloisa sat in her car across the street, engine running, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Marcus had insisted on coming with her, but she'd convinced him to wait 3 blocks away, close enough to help if needed, far enough to avoid walking into a trap together. Her phone buzzed. A text from the unknown number, 2nd floor. Northwest corner. Come alone. She touched her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. I'm sorry, she whispered. Mommy has to fix this. The warehouse's main entrance hung open, its chain-link barrier cut clean through. Eloisa stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Shafts of dusty sunlight slanted through broken windows, illuminating graffiti-covered walls and scattered debris. The air smelled of rust and decay. A metal staircase led to the 2nd floor. Each step groaned under her weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she climbed, one hand gripping the railing, the other pressed protectively over her stomach. The northwest corner was shrouded in shadows. As her eyes adjusted, she made out a figure sitting on a stack of wooden crates, a woman, maybe 40, with short dark hair and hollow eyes. She wore a black jacket and jeans, both expensive but wrinkled, as if she'd been sleeping in them. You're smaller than I expected, the woman said. Her voice carried a slight accent, possibly Eastern European, and more pregnant. Who are you? Eloisa's voice cracked slightly. Someone who's been looking for those suitcases for 3 years. The woman stood, moving with predatory grace. My name is Vera Kozlov. My brother was one of the people whose belongings you found. Eloisa's mind raced. She'd memorized every name from the missing persons reports. Dmitry Kozlov, disappeared in Seattle, 2021. Very good. You've done your homework. Vera stepped closer, and Eloisa noticed the woman's right hand remained hidden behind her back. My brother was an investigative journalist. He was getting close to exposing something big, a network of people who make other people disappear. Permanently. The trafficking ring. More than trafficking. Murder for hire, identity theft, organ harvesting, a full-service disposal operation for anyone with enough money and the need to make problems disappear. Vera's eyes glittered with rage. Dmitry had evidence, names, locations, financial records, everything. Eloisa felt sick, and someone killed him for it. Someone killed all of them. Vera gestured vaguely, encompassing all the victims, but they made a mistake. They kept trophies, driver's licenses, jewelry, personal items, probably to prove to their clients that the jobs were done. Why haven't you gone to the police? Vera laughed bitterly. Because some of those names Dmitry uncovered belonged to police, politicians, judges, people who could make evidence disappear and witnesses die in convenient accidents. A chill ran down Eloisa's spine. What do you want from me? I want what my brother died for. I want justice." Vera brought her hidden hand forward, revealing not a weapon but a thick manila envelope. "I want you to help me finish what he started." Eloisa stared at the envelope. "I already gave everything to the FBI." "Did you? All of it?" Vera's smile was sharp. "Or did you hold something back? Something you thought might be dangerous to possess?" Heat flooded Eloisa's cheeks. She had kept something. A USB drive she'd found sewn into the lining of one suitcase, containing encrypted files she couldn't open. She'd been afraid to mention it, afraid of drawing more attention to herself. "I see I'm right." Vera stepped closer. "That drive contains my brother's investigation, the real evidence. What you gave the FBI was just the collection of trophies. How do you know about the drive?" "Because Dmitri told me about it before he disappeared. He said if anything happened to him, I should look for a black USB drive hidden in his emergency bag." Vera's voice softened slightly. "That bag was in one of those suitcases, wasn't it?" Eloisa nodded reluctantly. "Then you understand why I've been watching you. Why I needed to be sure you were really trying to help those victims and not working for the people who killed them." "I'm not working for anyone. I just wanted to do the right thing." "Good. Because those people know you have that drive now. They know you talked to Detective Morrison. They're planning to tie up loose ends." Vera held out the envelope. "This contains everything I've uncovered about the network. Combined with what's on that drive, it should be enough to bring them down. Why don't you do it yourself?" "Because they know who I am. I'm a target now, just like you." Vera's expression grew urgent. "But you have something I don't. FBI protection. Agent Chen seems trustworthy. Get the drive to her, along with my research. Make sure both sets of evidence reach the right people simultaneously." Eloisa took the envelope with shaking hands. "What happens to us after that?" "If we're lucky, we disappear into witness protection until the trials are over." Vera's smile was grim. "If we're not lucky, we disappear permanently." The fluorescent lights in Detective Martinez's office buzzed overhead as Eloisa spread the photographs across his desk with trembling hands. Each image told a story of terror, missing persons she now knew were dead, their final moments captured in horrifying detail. Martinez leaned forward, his weathered face growing pale as he examined each photograph. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, picking up a photo of a young woman bound to a chair. "This is Rebecca Chen. She disappeared 3 months ago." His voice cracked. "We've been looking for her everywhere." Eloisa's baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing the darkness surrounding them. She pressed her hand to her belly, trying to find comfort in the movement. "There are more," she said, her voice barely audible. "At least 15 different people in those photos." Martinez reached for his phone, but Eloisa grabbed his wrist. "Wait, there's something else you need to know." She pulled out her cell phone and showed him the text message that had arrived just before she entered the police station. "He knows I'm here." The message was simple. "Tell the police and the baby dies first." Martinez stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. "When did this come in?" 5 minutes ago. He's been watching me constantly. He knows where I live, where I work, probably where I'm sitting right now." Eloisa's voice rose with each word, panic creeping in despite her efforts to stay calm. "We're going to protect you," Martinez said, but even as he spoke, his eyes darted to the window. "I'm calling in a team right now." "You don't understand." Eloisa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This person has been killing for months, maybe years. He's organized, careful, and he's been planning this. What if coming here was exactly what he wanted?" The detective's radio crackled to life. "All units, we have a 10 to 54 at the Pineview storage facility. Multiple explosions reported. Fire department en route." Eloisa's blood ran cold. "That's where I found the suitcases." Martinez was already reaching for his jacket. "That's not a coincidence." He turned to her, his expression grave. "He's covering his tracks, eliminating evidence." "But why let you keep the photos?" Because I'm not evidence, Eloisa realized with growing horror. I'm the next victim. Before Martinez could respond, the lights in the building flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Through the window, Eloisa could see the entire block had gone dark. "That's not an accident either," Martinez said, drawing his weapon. He grabbed his radio. "This is Detective Martinez. We have a situation at the station, requesting immediate backup." Static was the only response. Eloisa heard footsteps in the corridor outside, slow and deliberate. Martinez motioned for her to get behind his desk, but the baby's weight made it difficult to move quickly. Each step sent sharp pains through her lower back. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. Martinez positioned himself between Eloisa and the entrance, his gun raised. "Police, identify yourself." The handle turned slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a figure in a maintenance uniform. Eloisa couldn't see his face clearly in the emergency lighting, but something about his build seemed familiar. "Just checking the electrical situation, officer," the man said in a calm, pleasant voice. "Looks like the whole grid's down." "Stop right there," Martinez commanded. "Show me your hands." The man complied, raising his hands slowly. In his right hand was a small device that looked like a remote control. "You know, Detective, I've been watching your investigation into the missing persons cases. Very thorough work." Eloisa's heart hammered against her chest. This was him, the killer, standing just 10 feet away, talking to them like an old friend. "I particularly enjoyed watching Miss Vega discover my collection," he continued, his voice never losing its conversational tone. "Such genuine shock. It's rare to find authentic emotion these days." "Get down on the ground now," Martinez shouted. Instead, the man smiled. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. You see, I've spent considerable time preparing for this moment. The explosives in the storage unit were just the beginning." Eloisa saw his thumb move toward the device in his hand. Without thinking, she grabbed the heavy desk lamp and hurled it toward him with all her strength. The lamp crashed into his shoulder, causing him to stumble and drop the remote. Martinez lunged forward, tackling the man to the ground, but not before Eloisa heard a soft click from the fallen device. In the distance, she could hear what sounded like thunder, but the sky had been clear when she entered the building. As the two men struggled on the floor, she realized the sound was getting closer. The building began to shake. "He's rigged the whole block," Martinez gasped, wrestling to maintain control of the suspect. "We need to get out of here now." Eloisa struggled to her feet, her pregnant body protesting every movement as debris began falling from the ceiling above. The pregnancy test results trembled in Eloisa's hands as she sat in her car outside the clinic, Dr. Martinez's words echoing in her mind. 28 weeks. Everything looked normal, healthy even, despite the stress she'd endured. The baby was thriving, oblivious to the nightmare surrounding its mother. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. "Time's running out, Eloisa. You have something that doesn't belong to you." She deleted the message without responding, her hands shaking as she started the engine. The past 2 weeks had been a relentless barrage of threats, mysterious phone calls, and the suffocating sensation of being watched. Detective Morrison had assigned a patrol car to drive by her apartment, but the police presence felt inadequate against whatever force was hunting her. The storage unit evidence sat locked in a safety deposit box downtown, copies hidden in 3 different locations. She'd learned paranoia from necessity, understanding now why the original owner had been so careful about concealing the suitcases. Whoever had killed those missing people wasn't just dangerous. They were methodical, patient, and clearly still active. Driving home, Eloisa noticed the silver sedan 3 cars behind her, the same one she'd spotted outside the clinic. Her heart rate spiked as she took a sudden right turn, watching in her rearview mirror. The sedan followed. She pulled into a busy grocery store parking lot, circling toward the back where delivery trucks created natural barriers. The sedan hesitated, then continued past the entrance. Through her side mirror she caught a glimpse of the driver, a woman with short, dark hair and sunglasses, talking into a phone. Eloisa waited 15 minutes before leaving, taking a circuitous route that added 30 minutes to her journey home. The sedan didn't reappear, but the encounter left her nerves frayed. They were getting bolder, less concerned about hiding their surveillance. At her apartment, Marcus was waiting on the front steps, his face creased with worry. "Where have you been? I've been calling for hours." "Doctor's appointment." She helped him to his feet, noting how his arthritis had worsened since this ordeal began. The stress was aging him rapidly. "The baby's fine. And you?" "Tired, scared, wondering if I should have just walked away from that storage unit." Marcus followed her inside, settling heavily into his usual chair while she made tea. "My contact at the police department called," he said quietly. "Morrison's been taken off the case." The teacup slipped from Eloisa's fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor. "What?" "Reassigned to a drug task force, effective immediately. The missing persons investigation has been transferred to a federal task force." "Which means what, exactly?" "It means someone with serious influence wants local law enforcement to back off." Marcus's voice carried a grim certainty. "It means we're on our own." Eloisa sank onto the couch, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby kicked, a strong flutter that usually brought comfort but now felt like a reminder of everything she stood to lose. "They're closing in, Marcus. I saw them today, following me from the clinic." "Then it's time to make a choice." Marcus leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped tightly. "We can run. I have a cabin upstate, completely off the grid. We disappear until this blows over. Or we force their hand, make them come for us on our terms." The idea terrified her, but Eloisa recognized the logic. Running would only delay the inevitable, and she couldn't spend the next months looking over her shoulder, constantly afraid for her unborn child. "What did you have in mind?" Marcus pulled out his laptop, opening it to reveal a news website. Channel 7 has an investigative journalist, Sarah Chen. She's been digging into cold cases, specifically looking for patterns in missing persons reports. I think she'd be very interested in what we found. Going public could make us bigger targets. Or it could make us too visible to eliminate quietly. Marcus's eyes held the sharp intelligence that had made him a successful investigative reporter decades ago. These people operate in shadows. Exposure is their greatest enemy. Eloisa considered the proposal, weighing the risks. The alternative was a life of constant fear, potentially putting her child in perpetual danger. At least this way, they'd be taking action instead of simply reacting. Set up the meeting, she decided, but somewhere public, somewhere safe. Marcus nodded, already reaching for his phone. "Sarah owes me a favor from way back. She'll meet us." As he made the call, Eloisa walked to her bedroom window, peering through the blinds at the street below. A different car now, dark blue instead of silver, but she could see the silhouette of someone waiting inside. They were running out of time, and whoever was hunting them was growing impatient. The next move would determine whether they became victims like the people in those suitcases, or whether they could finally turn the tables on their stalkers. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, as if sensing the approaching storm. The abandoned warehouse district felt like a maze of shadows and rusted metal as Eloisa navigated the narrow streets, checking her rearview mirror every few seconds. Marcus sat beside her, his jaw tight with concentration as he studied the printouts they'd made at the library. The addresses of the missing persons' last known locations formed a pattern that had made her stomach drop when she first saw it plotted on the map. "Turn left here," Marcus said quietly, pointing toward a street lined with empty loading docks. The Hendricks woman was last seen 3 blocks from here. Eloisa's hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. 6 weeks had passed since she'd bought that storage unit. 6 weeks since her life had transformed into this nightmare of constant vigilance and growing dread. The baby moved restlessly inside her, as if sensing her anxiety. There, Marcus pointed to a faded sign reading, "Sunset Storage, Additional Facility." Jesus, Eloisa, look at that. The building was smaller than the main facility where she'd bought Unit 247, but the architecture was identical. Same corrugated metal siding, same style of rolling doors, same industrial lighting fixtures hanging dark and empty. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but the gate hung open, revealing rows of storage units disappearing into the gloom. "It's closed down," she whispered, pulling to the curb. "Has been for months by the look of it." They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding the implications. The storage facilities weren't random locations, they were part of a network, a system. Marcus checked his phone. No signal. Convenient. He looked at her seriously. "We should call Detective Chen first. Let her know what we found." "With what phone? And tell her what exactly? That we think there might be more evidence in an abandoned building?" Eloisa shook her head. "She already thinks I'm paranoid. She needs proof." "Eloisa, this feels like a trap." She knew he was right, but the urgency in her chest wouldn't let her walk away. 5 minutes. We go in, take photos of anything relevant, and leave. If we can prove this place connects to the storage unit I bought, Chen will have to take this seriously." The fence squealed as they pushed through the gate. Up close, the abandonment was even more pronounced. Weeds pushed through cracks in the asphalt, and several of the unit doors hung partially open, revealing empty interiors filled with debris. But the lock on Unit 47 was different. Newer, still functional. "That's not right," Marcus muttered, examining the heavy-duty padlock. "Everything else here is deteriorating, but this—" A sound made them both freeze, footsteps echoing from somewhere deeper in the facility. Slow, deliberate steps moving between the rows of units. Eloisa's breath caught. They weren't alone. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a concrete support pillar. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the soft scraping sound of something being dragged across the pavement. Eloisa pressed her back against the cold concrete, her heart hammering so hard she was sure it would give them away. A figure emerged from the shadows between the units. Tall, wearing dark clothing, face obscured by a baseball cap pulled low. In the dim light filtering through dirty windows, she couldn't make out features, but something about the person's movements struck her as familiar. The deliberate pace, the way they held their shoulders. The figure stopped directly in front of Unit 47, produced a key, and opened the lock with practiced efficiency. The rolling door lifted with barely a whisper of sound, revealing not an empty space, but a carefully organized interior lit by battery-powered lanterns. Eloisa had to cover her mouth to keep from gasping. The unit was full of surveillance equipment, monitors, cameras, maps, and corkboards covered with photographs. Even from her hiding spot, she could see her own face staring back from dozens of pictures. Images of her at the grocery store, walking to her apartment, meeting with Detective Chen. The figure moved inside and began checking the equipment methodically. When they turned to adjust one of the monitors, Eloisa caught a glimpse of profile, and her blood turned to ice. It was the storage facility manager, the one who'd been so helpful during the auction, who'd seemed so concerned about her finding those suitcases. David something. He'd been watching her from the very beginning, not just since she'd bought the unit, but probably before she'd even arrived at the auction. Marcus saw her recognition and tightened his grip on her arm. They needed to leave, needed to get somewhere safe and call for help. But as they began to creep back toward the entrance, Eloisa's phone, which she'd forgotten to silence, buzzed with a text message. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet building. Inside Unit 47, all movement stopped. Then the lights went out, plunging the facility into complete darkness, and the only sound was the echo of running footsteps heading straight toward their hiding place. The burner phone buzzed against Eloisa's palm, its vibration sending electric jolts of fear through her already frayed nerves. Detective Morrison sat across from her in the cramped surveillance van, his eyes fixed on the small screen displaying the incoming text message. "It's him," she whispered, though they both already knew. The message was brief, typed in the same cold, clinical style she'd grown to dread. Building 47, Unit 23C. "Come alone. You have 30 minutes or Sarah Chen joins the others permanently." Morrison's jaw tightened. Through the van's tinted windows, they could see the sprawling complex of storage facilities stretching into the industrial district shadows. Building 47 sat at the far end, isolated and poorly lit. "We have units positioned around the perimeter," Morrison said, his voice steady despite the tension crackling through the confined space. "The moment you're inside, we move in." Eloisa's hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly, where the baby had been restless all evening, as if sensing her anxiety. The wire taped beneath her shirt felt foreign against her skin, a reminder of how surreal her life had become since that first storage unit purchased 3 weeks ago. What if he's not there? What if it's another trap? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Then we adapt," Morrison replied. "But this feels different. He's getting desperate, making mistakes. The fact that he's finally agreed to meet means we're close to something he doesn't want us to find." The radio crackled with updates from the tactical team. Officers in position, snipers on nearby rooftops, every exit covered. Yet Eloisa couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something carefully orchestrated. Another move in a game where she'd never understood the rules. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a photo appeared on the screen, Sarah Chen, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror above a piece of duct tape. Behind her, Eloisa could make out concrete walls and what looked like shelving units. The timestamp showed it had been taken just minutes ago. "He's really got her," Eloisa breathed. Morrison leaned closer, studying the image. Those walls, they looked like the interior of a storage unit. He's probably been using these facilities longer than we thought. 25 minutes remaining. Eloisa stepped out of the van, the cool night air hitting her face like a slap. Her legs felt unsteady, each step toward Building 47 requiring conscious effort. The baby kicked sharply, and she pressed her hand against the movement, trying to find comfort in the reminder of life growing within her. The storage facility was eerily quiet, just the distant hum of highway traffic and the occasional creak of metal settling in the cooling air. Motion sensor lights flickered on as she approached, casting harsh shadows that seemed to dance and shift with each footstep. Building 47 loomed ahead, a long, low structure with roll-up doors stretching down both sides. Unit 23C was halfway down the left corridor, and as Eloisa approached, she noticed the door was already partially raised, revealing only darkness beyond. Her earpiece crackled with Morrison's voice. "We've got eyes on you. Remember, keep him talking. We need him to reveal where the others are." The storage unit smelled of dust and something else, something organic and unpleasant that made her stomach turn. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering in from the corridor, she could make out shapes in the darkness, cardboard boxes, plastic containers, and along the back wall, a row of suitcases that looked sickeningly familiar. "You came." The voice emerged from the shadows to her right, calm and measured. Eloisa spun toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs. A figure stepped into the weak light, middle-aged, unremarkable, wearing glasses and a janitor's uniform that bore the storage facility's logo. "I know you," she said, recognition dawning. "You were there the day I bought the unit. You work here." He smiled, a thin expression that never reached his eyes. "I've worked here for 8 years. Do you know how many people come and go? How many units get abandoned, forgotten? How easy it is to move things around when you have access to everything. Where's Sarah?" "Safe, for now." He gestured toward the suitcases lining the wall. "You started something when you bought that unit, something I'd spent years keeping contained. Each of those cases represents someone who got too close, asked too many questions." Eloisa's blood turned cold as the implications sank in. "The missing persons, you took them." "I collected them," he corrected. as if the distinction mattered. People who wouldn't be missed, who had already slipped through society's cracks. I gave their stories meaning, preserved their final moments. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Eloisa realized she was breathing too fast, hyperventilating. Through her earpiece she could hear Morrison's voice, urgent but distant, telling her backup was moving into position. "But you," the man continued, stepping closer, "you were different, pregnant, desperate, photogenic. When you found that unit, I realized you could be the final piece, the one that would make all the others matter." The abandoned warehouse loomed against the storm clouds, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring down at them. Eloisa pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby's restless movement as if it sensed her fear. Detective Martinez parked behind a cluster of rusted shipping containers, the engine ticking as it cooled. "Are you sure about this?" Martinez whispered, checking her service weapon. "We could wait for backup." Eloisa shook her head. "He specifically said to come alone, or Sarah dies. We can't risk it." Her voice trembled despite her attempt at courage. 3 days had passed since the stalker's last message, 3 days of sleepless nights and jumping at shadows. The text had finally come that morning, warehouse on Pier 47. 1 hour. Come alone or the Walsh girl joins the others. They moved through the maze of abandoned equipment, Martinez staying 20 feet behind as planned. The detective would circle around to the back entrance while Eloisa went through the front, hoping to catch their tormentor off guard. The wind off the harbor carried the smell of rust and decay, mixing with the ozone scent of approaching rain. The warehouse door stood slightly ajar, darkness yawning beyond. Eloisa's phone buzzed. Inside, 2nd floor, alone. She stepped into the cavernous space, her footsteps echoing off concrete walls. Shafts of grey light filtered through the broken skylights, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts. A metal staircase led to a series of offices that overlooked the main floor. Each step creaked under her weight, the sound amplified in the silence. "I'm here," she called out, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "I know you are." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, distorted by speakers hidden throughout the building. "But you didn't come alone, did you, Eloisa?" Her blood ran cold. Through one of the office windows she caught a glimpse of movement. Someone tied to a chair. Sarah's blonde hair caught the light. "Let her go," Eloisa demanded, reaching the 2nd floor landing. "You want me, not her." Laughter echoed through the speakers. "Oh, but this is so much more interesting. Detective Martinez, please join us. I know you're out there." A new fear gripped Eloisa's chest. How long had he been watching? How much did he know? "The door to your left, Eloisa." "Sarah's waiting." She pushed open the office door and found Sarah Walsh bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror but very much alive. Eloisa rushed forward, but Sarah shook her head frantically, trying to warn her of something. Too late, Eloisa heard the footsteps behind her. "Hello, Eloisa. We finally meet properly." She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man standing in the doorway looked utterly ordinary. Middle-aged, thinning hair, wearing a maintenance uniform. She'd probably passed him on the street a dozen times without a second glance. "Richard Hoffman," he said, as if introducing himself at a dinner party. "Though you might know me better as the previous owner of Storage Unit 247, the pieces clicked into place. You're the one who rented it originally. You put the suitcases there." "Very good. I've been collecting for years, you see, documenting the forgotten ones the People's Society overlooks. Like you, actually." His pale eyes fixed on her belly, a pregnant woman struggling to make ends meet. Perfect victim material. "But you made a mistake," Eloisa said, trying to keep him talking. "Where was Martinez? You didn't pay the storage fees." Hoffman's expression darkened. "A temporary financial setback. I always intended to reclaim my collection. Imagine my surprise when some pregnant girl bought my life's work at auction." He stepped closer. "Did you really think you could profit from my collection, sell it piece by piece like garage sale trinkets?" "I called the police. I tried to do the right thing." "After you'd already contaminated the evidence. After you'd handled everything with your grubby little fingers. His voice rose with each word. Do you have any idea how long it took me to organize those files? To properly catalogue each disappearance? A crash came from somewhere below, Martinez making her move. Hoffman's head snapped toward the sound, and in that instant, Eloisa lunged for Sarah, working frantically at the ropes binding her wrists. Stupid, Hoffman hissed, pulling a knife from his belt. You've ruined everything, just like you ruined my collection. The blade caught the light as he raised it, but Sarah's bonds came free at that moment. She threw herself at Hoffman's legs, sending him stumbling backward. Eloisa grabbed Sarah's hand and they ran for the door, but Hoffman recovered quickly, his footsteps pounding behind them. They reached the staircase as Martinez appeared at the bottom, weapon drawn. LAPD, drop the knife! Hoffman grabbed Eloisa's arm, the blade pressed against her throat. She felt the cold metal against her skin and thought of her baby, of all the things they'd never get to experience together if this went wrong. Let them go, Hoffman, Martinez called. It's over, but Eloisa could feel the tremor in his grip, the desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. The safe house felt like a tomb. Detective Martinez paced the small living room, while Eloisa sat hunched over the coffee table, her hands trembling as she sorted through the remaining photographs. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her anxiety. 3 days had passed since they'd moved her here, and the walls seemed to close in with each passing hour. We can't keep you hidden forever, Martinez said, stopping to look out through the blinds. Whoever's behind this is patient, but they're not going to give up. They've invested too much time tracking you. Eloisa picked up a photograph of a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Sarah Chen, according to the file. Missing for 18 months. All these people, she whispered. How did no one connect the disappearances? Different jurisdictions, different time periods. It's brilliant, actually. Martinez's jaw tightened. Someone's been very careful about spacing these out, making sure no patterns emerged. The secure phone buzzed. Martinez answered on the first ring, his expression growing darker with each word. When he hung up, his face was grim. What is it? They found something at your apartment building. Security footage from the parking garage shows the same van parked there multiple times over the past month. Always at night, always in the same spot with a perfect view of your unit. Eloisa's blood ran cold. A month. They'd been watching her for a month before she'd even bought the storage unit. That's impossible. I only bought the unit 3 weeks ago. Which means they knew you were going to buy it before you did. The implication hit her like a physical blow. The auction. Someone manipulated the auction. Martinez nodded slowly. We checked. The storage facility received an anonymous tip about abandonment on that specific unit just 2 weeks before the auction. Whoever owns those files wanted them found, by you specifically. But why me? Eloisa's voice cracked. I'm nobody. I'm just a pregnant woman trying to make ends meet. That's exactly why. Martinez sat across from her, his expression intense. Think about it. You're vulnerable, financially desperate, likely to dig through everything looking for valuable items. And you're sympathetic. A pregnant woman finding evidence of missing people would generate maximum media attention if the story broke right. You think this is about publicity? I think this is about control. Someone wants these cases exposed, but on their terms. They're using you as the delivery system. Before Eloisa could respond, the lights went out. Martinez was on his feet instantly, weapon drawn. Stay down, he hissed, moving toward the window. The streetlights outside flickered once and died, plunging the entire block into darkness. Eloisa's heart hammered against her ribs. The baby kicked harder, responding to her fear. She crawled behind the couch, clutching the files to her chest. A soft scraping sound came from the back of the house. Martinez spoke quietly into his radio, calling for backup, but received only static in response. He moved toward the hallway, gesturing for Eloisa to stay hidden. The front door handle turned slowly. Time seemed suspended. Eloisa held her breath, watching Martinez position himself behind the kitchen counter, his weapon trained on the entrance. The door opened with a barely audible creak. A figure stepped into the darkness, tall, wearing all black, moving with practiced silence. But instead of advancing, they stopped just inside the threshold. "Detective Martinez," a calm voice called out. Male, middle-aged, educated. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to talk to Ms. Rivera." "Show yourself," Martinez commanded. "Hands where I can see them." A small flashlight clicked on, illuminating a man in his 50s, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked more like an accountant than a killer. His hands were raised empty. "My name is Dr. Richard Carver. I used to work for the State Medical Examiner's Office. Those files you found belong to me." Eloisa emerged from behind the couch, despite Martinez's sharp gesture to stay down. Something in the man's voice, a note of desperate sadness, made her believe he wasn't there to harm them. "You're the one who's been watching me." Dr. Carver's shoulders sagged. "I had to make sure the files went to someone who would care enough to look closely, someone who would ask questions. You could have gone to the police yourself." "With what proof?" "I have photographs and documents, but no bodies, no crime scenes. And the people responsible for these disappearances, they have resources I don't. Connections in law enforcement, in government. I tried to expose this years ago and nearly ended up missing myself." Martinez kept his weapon trained on the doctor. "So you decided to put an innocent woman in danger instead?" "I never meant for it to go this far. I thought if the story broke through civilian channels, if someone stumbled across the evidence naturally, it would be harder for them to cover up." The baby kicked again, sharper this time, and Eloisa winced. Dr. Carver noticed, his expression filling with guilt. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but you're the only chance these families have for answers." The warehouse stretched endlessly in the dim fluorescent light, rows upon rows of storage units creating a maze that seemed to pulse with Eloisa's heartbeat. Her hand trembled as she gripped the phone, Detective Morrison's voice crackling through the speaker as backup units surrounded the building. But Marcus was already here, somewhere in this labyrinth, and she could feel his presence like ice in her veins. "Unit 47B, she whispered into the phone. "That's where he wants me. Eloisa, do not go in there alone." Morrison's voice was sharp with urgency. "We're 2 minutes out." But 2 minutes felt like an eternity when every second brought her closer to understanding the truth about the missing people, about Sarah Chen and David Walsh and all the others whose lives had been reduced to evidence in suitcases. Her baby shifted restlessly inside her, as if sensing the danger, and she placed a protective hand over her belly. The overhead lights flickered ominously as she moved deeper into the facility. Unit 47B sat at the far end of the main corridor, its metal door slightly ajar. A thin strip of golden light spilled from within, casting an elongated rectangle across the concrete floor. Eloisa's footsteps echoed despite her attempts to move silently, each sound amplifying her vulnerability. She paused at the threshold, her breath coming in short gasps. Inside, she could see the familiar shape of storage boxes and furniture, but something was different. A camping chair sat in the center of the space, facing a collection of photographs pinned to a makeshift bulletin board. Even from the doorway, she recognized her own face staring back at her from dozens of images, leaving her apartment, walking to work, purchasing the storage unit that had started this nightmare. "I was wondering when you'd finally come." Marcus's voice drifted from the shadows behind the chair. He stepped into view slowly, his appearance disheveled and hollow-eyed, as if the weight of his secrets had physically consumed him. "You're very persistent, Eloisa. Much more than the others." "The others?" She forced herself to step inside, keeping her distance but needing to see his face clearly. "You mean your victims?" Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Victims? Is that what you think they were?" He gestured toward the photographs on the board, and she realized they weren't just pictures of her. Mixed among them were images of Sarah Chen, David Walsh, and at least a dozen other faces she didn't recognize. They were predators, Eloisa, every single one of them. People who hurt the innocent, who destroyed families. That doesn't give you the right to... To what? To stop them? His eyes blazed with a fervor that made her skin crawl. Sarah Chen was selling drugs to teenagers. David Walsh was embezzling money from a children's charity. They deserved what happened to them. Eloisa's mind raced, trying to process his words while calculating the distance to the door. And me? What did I do to deserve this? Marcus's expression softened slightly, taking on an almost paternal quality that was somehow more terrifying than his anger. You were never supposed to be involved. That storage unit, those suitcases, they were meant to disappear. But when you found them, when you started asking questions... He shrugged. I realized you might be different. You're carrying new life, fighting for something pure. I thought maybe you'd understand. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, and Marcus's calm demeanor cracked. His hand moved to his jacket, and Eloisa caught the glint of metal. They won't understand, though. They'll try to stop what I'm doing, try to protect the guilty. Marcus, please. She kept her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. Think about what you're saying. You can't decide who lives and dies based on your judgment alone. But someone has to decide. The words exploded from him with years of pent-up rage. Someone has to protect the innocent when the system fails them. Heavy footsteps thundered through the corridor outside, and Morrison's voice boomed through a megaphone demanding Marcus's surrender. The fluorescent lights flickered more frantically now, casting dancing shadows that made the storage unit feel like a fever dream. Marcus pulled the gun free, but instead of pointing it at Eloisa, he held it loosely at his side. You have a choice now, he said quietly. You can tell them I was a monster, or you can understand that everything I did was necessary. I understand that you're in pain, Eloisa said, tears streaming down her face, but this isn't the way to heal it. The warehouse fell silent, except for the humming of the lights and the distant murmur of police radios. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as if looking for absolution. Then, slowly, he placed the gun on the ground and raised his hands. Maybe, he whispered, it's time to let someone else decide.